What's up guys, today we're making some PTFE fuel line for the Lexus here. I'm using it mainly because PTFE is rated for E85 and that's what I'm going to be running on this car, so stick around and we'll show you how it's done. So I already have the hose that is coming from the fuel pump to my bypass module here. For the hose that we were making, you obviously want to have the one side hooked up, so install your fitting on the end of the hose that is your full length that you have not cut yet, and you're going to route it up to wherever you need to go, and then we will be marking it on the top side where it needs to hook up to the fuel rail, and we will install the other fitting up there. So after you have your one end of the hose hooked up to wherever it needs to be, in my case it is the bypass block that I'm using, you need to give yourself some slack obviously on the hose. Preferably you need to use a mounting bracket down there somewhere, which I will be doing. So I'm going to add a little extra length, but essentially you just want to line it up a little bit with the bottom of the fitting there, and then just mark it. And then after we mark it, we will cut it and install our other fitting on the end of this side. So now you have your line marked and off the car. There are a few methods to cut these lines. You can use shears, and they sell, like a big bolt cutter type shear, which are expensive and I think are completely unnecessary because they cut it horribly, and then you end up with something like this. It's smashed in, kind of a pain in the ass to round it back out. Best way I feel like is just a grinder and a cutoff wheel. It's super fast and it'll leave you with a nice cut like that, and you don't have to round it out very much at all. So we're going to go ahead and cut this one, and then we will install the other side fitting, which will mount right to the fuel rail. Another thing too, make sure you wrap this with tape before you cut it, regardless if you're using shears or a cutoff wheel like I just did. And after you do have it trimmed to your size, leave the tape on, because when we slide this collar on, you want the tape to hold all the stainless steel braiding together, and also the nylon. If you're using the nylon with the stainless steel braid, it's definitely more important. If it's just a stainless steel, probably won't need to do this, but I would still just do it anyways. It makes it way easier to get that collar on. Essentially this collar will slip on like this, which I will do, but I need both hands. Essentially the collar just slips on here. Like I was saying, leave your tape on, because if you do not, it'll be a pain in the ass to get these braids in all the way. Just kind of work it around. It should just slip on. After it is on, you can go ahead and take the tape off. Just like that, and you end up with a pretty clean cut there. Also, go ahead and blow out the other side, just to make sure there's no material in there. I will flush it out with brake cleaner once I'm done with this hose, but that's all we need to do right now. Then what you want to do is you want to expand the stainless steel away from the inner core, so that we can get our crimp collar on there. Normally a small screwdriver works really well. Just make sure you don't get too aggressive with it, as you don't want to puncture that inner lining. Just kind of break it up there. You should have something like this. Another thing that is really important to have is this AN chuck tool that will mount into your vise. Got little magnets on the backside. This particular brand is Racetronics. They use mainly all their fittings, super high quality stuff. What you want to do is get your hose mounted inside. Give yourself a little bit of room so that it's not sticking out too far. And actually clamp the hose a bit. So I'm going to put on the sealing crush collar here. It's going to go in between the stainless steel braid and over the inner core. Sometimes you can push it on here. I have a tool here that helps you insert this all the way. Just going to give it a few taps. And also make sure the inner core is fully seated against the outside of this collar. So you do not want to have any leaks, especially on the fuel line. We all know what can happen then. Fires, which you don't want. This is seated all the way. Also make sure it's square. Sometimes they can get a little off. You can get pushed in either direction, as long as you're square and it's fully seated. Should be good. And then we'll bring the collar into the vise tool here, the fitting collar. Lined up a bit. Then you're going to want to push this entire assembly hose with the collar on the end of it into here. Get our tool again, just like I got from Jegs, just an AN. I think it's a collar pressing tool. I think they have them on Amazon, but wanted a higher quality one, so I went with Jegs. Then you just kind of give it a few taps. The nice thing about this is it will insert into the inner side, but it will also push your collar on without messing up the actual inner hose. And then stop once you feel resistance. Next thing, we're going to put some silicone on the end of our fitting. You don't want to lube the collar when you're putting it onto the hose, onto the inner side, because it could pop out of that crimp. So we want to leave that dry and just lube the fitting. So this goes in easily. Sometimes you got to work it around, really get it set. Pull it out a bit, make sure you're not screwing up the inside of the hose. Looks good, so just keep going here. Sometimes a few little taps. And you can see it drove in pretty nicely there. Give it a push when you're starting the threads. See if it's going in. No, gotta go a little more. Right, so now that we have some resistance, definitely need a AN wrench. If you use a normal wrench on these things, an open end, it's gonna scratch up the paint and it's gonna roll the edges. Which, if you want your line to look like it's professionally done, you don't want all the paint missing and all the edges round. So this is a good tool to have. Once again, just Amazon. I bought this one from Racetronics, but they're all the same. Go ahead and tighten this one down. When we first start tightening this down, it should go pretty easy. After about 4 rotations, you start to feel some resistance, and that's a good sign, because that means your collar is doing its job. It's locking that hose in there. Just kind of make sure the hose looks straight from the backside. Sometimes it can get a little crooked. This one looks like it's seating pretty good. Just continue to tighten it down slowly. Definitely will feel some resistance here. That's how it should look before you start tightening the fitting down all the way. Just make sure everything's square. You do not want to cross thread these, because if you do, they will break pretty quick. This looks good. So we're going to start tightening this one down. Normally might need to put some pressure on it at first. Alright, so now that we got it tightened down, you do not need to tighten this all the way down to where it's completely touching. You want to leave a little bit of a gap. I mean, that's probably a good 1/8 of an inch gap. I mean, at this point it starts getting pretty tight, and you can feel that it's about to break. So you don't want to really go past that. Also line up, make sure the fitting's all lined up. You don't want this off center with this and have it look all janky. So at this point, this is a finished hose, and we are done with this hose. There you go, looks nice, and everything looks straight. Got the main feed line all done there. As you can see, I left myself plenty of room so I could mount a billet aluminum mounting bracket for the hose. You just don't want a fuel line to vibrate and move, and because that can create pinholes, or from rubbing. So, but that is a finished line right there. It is hooked up to the main feed line rail.